Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Living New Deal's webinar, Folk Music and the New Deal, Collecting the Hidden Soundtracks of the Great Depression. I'm Susan Ives, Director of Communications for the nonprofit Living New Deal. Our mission is to preserve the New Deal's legacy, and we're documenting what the New Deal provided: jobs, infrastructure, parks, schools, public art, and importantly, a model of government dedicated to working for everyday Americans. Much of what the New Deal left to us is still in use today, though its New Deal provenance is often unrecognized or long forgotten. Our website, livingnewdeal.org, is the first ever online archive of the New Deal's achievements, where you can learn about the New Deal's history, policies, people, programs, and search some 18,000 New Deal sites we've identified, with help from volunteers around the country. So, if you come upon a New Deal site that we haven't yet added to our website, please let us know. Please also sign up for our online newsletter, The Fireside, and you'll also receive invitations to talks, tours, exhibits, and online events like this one. As always, we're grateful for your interest and support, which makes programs like this possible. Tonight's webinar, Folk Music and the New Deal, Collecting the Hidden Soundtracks of the Great Depression, daylights a hidden unit in the New Deal's short-lived Resettlement Agency. The music unit sent federal workers to government-built communities, most in rural areas, to bring music activities to the residents. The little-known program was intended to inspire cooperation and solidarity among the homesteaders. It also made hundreds of recordings of folk music that today reside at the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. An offshoot of this effort was a WPA program, the California Folk Music Project, headed by an intrepid collector of the state's ethnic music, Sidney Robertson. That collection is now held by the Music Division at the University of California, Berkeley. Our guests tonight are Cheryl Koskowitz and Kathy Kirst. Cheryl is a music scholar and author of the forthcoming book, A Chance to Harmonize: How FDR's Hidden Music Unit Sought to Save America from the Great Depression, One Song at a Time, published by Pegasus Books, to come out April 2nd. Catherine is a folklorist and former archivist at the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress, and author of the forthcoming book, California Gold, Sidney Robertson and the WPA California Folk Music Project, also coming out on the same day, April 2nd, from the University of California Press. Welcome to you both, and congratulations on your forthcoming books. Thank you so much for being with us. So Cheryl, would you like to start?
Yes. Let's see. Okay. Hello, everyone. It is such a pleasure to be here with you all. Let me just get this going. I'll just say that I've known Kathy since my very first interaction with Sidney Robertson, and you'll see she's sort of a through line in our conversation. I wrote a paper on her when I was in grad school. I got in touch with Kathy, and then I think 10 years later, I decided to apply to the Library of Congress Kluge Fellowship and to learn more about Sidney's early collecting. And thanks also to the Living New Deal. I really admire all the work you do, and I'm excited to share, what I've been working on with this amazing group of New Deal history lovers. So here we go. I promise this won't actually just be a slideshow of pictures of my time at the Library of Congress, but I did just want to start with this one from 2016 because it's really like where all of this began. So I knew that I wanted to learn about Sidney Robertson and her early recording. I knew that it was from the Resettlement Administration, and that's about all I knew at that point. And so I decided I needed to listen to the whole thing. And so I went to the American Folklife Center, and they set me up at this reel-to-reel tape player. And they gave me the reels, which were held in those boxes like down at the bottom there. And that's how I spent weeks of my time, just listening through. And this, what we're listening to right now, is her very first recording session. And let me just let... the musician is named Pink Queer. That's his band. And it was the first of 650 tracks that she collected for the Resettlement Administration. She's gonna come on here in a minute and tell you about it.
The first tune on this side is the Mississippi Sawyer. The second one is Old Sharon. On the other side are Bully of the Town, Golden Slippers, and Turkey in the Straw, in that order. They were all played at Ligonier, Pennsylvania, on November 10, 1936, by Tink Queer, fiddler, Franklin Slater, and Bill Fowler, guitars. This performance was for the Special Skills Division of the Resettlement Administration. This record is not for commercial use. It will be deposited in the Library of Congress for purposes of scientific research and for the use of the United States government.
And I know I can see Kathy smiling, because there's something about when you're studying someone who's, lived a long time ago and you can actually hear their voice. There's something really great about it. But she also told you a lot of the things that I was experiencing, which was, okay, here you were recording for the Resettlement Administration, and the recordings are amazing in terms of the things that they range across. And I knew that I wasn't going to be able to really represent them all. But what I really became the most interested in was, why was the Resettlement Administration, why were they recording folk music at all? And so I thought that I would just try to kind of walk you all through where this fit in the New Deal, into the New Deal. So the Resettlement Administration became the Farm Security Administration. And so many people know it then, about its life then, but it actually started in 1935. And it was enormous, this huge, gigantic agency that was started. And one of the things that they did, they gave loans and grants to farmers. They cleared land that had become unfarmable, and some turned it into like forest and national parks or federal parks. But the main thing that they were known for, and where they got their name, was these homesteads that they literally created. So they created these rural communities. There were suburban communities also, but I'm focusing on the rural side. And it was for people, they called them stranded populations. So it was really about helping people who had no work, no way of supporting themselves. So it was a mix of miners, where the mines had closed, or mill workers, lumber workers, urban unemployed who had no opportunities for work. And so this is like it's a little bit before the WPA got really going in the jobs. So in the jobs programs. And so that's what this was designed for, and also for farmers whose land had become unfarmable, and they were literally being resettled onto these rural communities. So, and you might notice, well, a couple things that some of you might notice about these photos. They were taken by Walker Evans and Carl Meidens, who became famous for their work with the FSA. it's that same group of people. They were basically hired to do PR for the Resettlement Administration. That's how it all started. And in the bottom one of Red House, you can see that we have some musical activities captured. So it's going to give you a hint about where this fit in. So this is Rexford G. Tugwell, who was appointed as the RA director. He was part of FDR's Brain Trust. He was a professor from Columbia, and the press loved calling him Rex the Red because he was very much one of the most progressive of the administration. But they also couldn't resist his good looks. He was often called, the most handsome of the brain trusters. And it was Rex who hired, this is Adrian Dornbush, who's a painter. And I'll explain why he's holding the chair that way in a minute, but he was hired to bring some arts into this resettlement project. So the organization, the division was called the Special Skills, which is very vague, purposefully so. And it basically had two purposes. So the first one was the sort of public facing. They were, think of them as an in-house design division. So they did all the furniture, they did the textiles, they printed the brochures and the posters, and so that was sort of, that's what characterized their work. They also had this quieter work that was on the homesteads themselves and bringing in the arts. And so you can see that this page right here was the only place where music was mentioned in this huge annual report that they put out. So, and they're saying that it's coming from the homesteaders themselves. When you read a lot of this language, it's clear that they were avoiding criticism. You can imagine that conservative critics would have seen this as wasteful. Yeah, there were a lot of the Resettlement Administration had a big target on it as for criticism of the New Deal. But that sentence after music, by developing activities in these skills, the homesteaders, for the most part strangers to each other, form social relationships and ties which are necessary in any community. And so you'll see that coming up again and again in terms of the focus on community connection. And this is from Catherine Kellock, who worked for Special Skills. She later went on to work for the Federal Writing Project. And she was sent out to find out how things were going when they first started. And it was a bit of a problem that morale was so low. And, she says there that, that the recreation that they were trying to do was just kind of decaying into hotbeds of discontent. And so this is one of my favorite sentences that I've encountered in my research. The Special Skills Division is sending in leaders of music in each of these 4 homesteads to help meet the need of the emergency situation, as well as the long-term plan. So I think what this gets at is that music was not only just a sort of let's keep them happy. It was really connected to a main goal of the Resettlement Administration, which was to inspire a larger ideological shift from rugged individualism to a new sense of collective purpose. And yes, it was radical, and they saw it as an experiment. And I think I mentioned that they called Rex Tugwell Rex the Red for a reason. He called himself a communalist or a collectivist. So this idea was not only would these communities form, a safe haven for people who were really hard hit by the Great Depression, but it would also encourage them to cooperative farm, to form cooperative industries, and to like make this big shift, which he and some others thought was necessary to get out. That was the way out of the Great Depression. So music was really used to support this goal, that cooperative farming and industries would take root on these homesteads by connecting people, making them aware of the power of community and feel like a part of the community on the homesteads. So that's how the music unit came to be. And these are sort of the main characters in my book. Charles Seeger was hired as the director. He is the father of Pete Seeger. He also went on to become a founder of the field of ethnomusicology in the U.S. Sidney Robertson, who Kathy and I are both talking about, was hired as a technical aide. And Margaret Valiant, who I won't have a chance to talk about, but I couldn't not include her in here because she's very much at the core of what the music unit was about. And she did do her own recording. So how does this still relate to folk music collecting, right? They could certainly have done this without doing that. This is something this was something that Charles brought in, was this idea, and this was an evolving idea for him. He was coming around to believe in this power of folk music. So he said, if singing together is a means to this end, which nobody will deny, then singing an old song, which has meant much to many generations, is better for this purpose. And if singing any traditional song is good, singing the songs which have acquired the flavor of the American spirit is better. And so that's what made them realize that the next thing that they needed to do was, as Adrian Dornbush said, send a music representative out with recording equipment. And he said that they would dig out the folk music and then turn it back into active singing and dancing programs on the homesteads. So they decided that they needed to buy a recording machine. And this was new. As far as I know, it's one of the first, if not the first, government-owned that wasn't related to a library. Again, I would need to check that, but it's very early on in that folklore, public folklore world. So, and it's also where the recording program connects all the way to the top. So Sidney loved to tell the story of how they had trouble getting approval for recording equipment. So she said, after repeated requests for a recording machine and repeated refusals for it from the budget director, who was understandably puzzled by the need of such a thing, or by anything to do with folk song at all, for people whose first need was money for food, Adrian Dornbush took the problem to Mrs. Roosevelt, who spoke to her husband, and FDR then said to the budget director, "Oh hell, let them have their recording machine." Possibly not a direct quote, but we get the idea. So we know that the First Lady and the President both had an affection for folk music. These are photos that have been used a lot when FDR comes up. This was him in Warm Springs. Alan Lomax said that he fell in love with all the old fiddlers, and they used to get drunk together on moonshine. And Eleanor Roosevelt sort of famously went to the White Top Folk Festival in 1933. She was the first president to express any interest, or, the first lady, the first really anyone that high up to express an interest in the value of folk music. So it was there already. And I just wanted to share, I don't have a picture of the recording equipment that they had. And no one seems to know what happened to it. but this is the same, built by the same manufacturer. It's a Garwick machine. And so you can see that it has, it's cutting, and they start out with aluminum discs. So it's cutting aluminum discs. It was said to weigh about 120 pounds. So it's portable because it has that handle there, but it was still quite a bit to carry around, in addition to another case of the aluminum discs themselves. So Sidney was sent out to record this music, and that's a lot of what my book is about. And I only have time to sort of go into a couple of them, a couple of sort of my favorite examples. So when she first got approval to go out on a solo recording trip in the fall of 1936, so she left in November, she was told to flag her favorite songs that could then be played for the Roosevelts when she got back. That Adrian Dornbush told her, we want to show them what we did with this equipment that they, sort of went out of their way to help us get. And so I just want to play one of those. This was a song, and again, there are so many strands that come up in looking at the music unit's activities. Race is one of them. This is a blues song. It was one of the very few songs that she collected from an African-American singer. And that has a lot to do with the Jim Crow South and some of the segregation that kind of constricted their work, the resettlement in general. However, she stopped in Arkansas, in Clinton, Arkansas, and it was right next to a town that had been founded by Black families after the Civil War. And so she found, she was able to move beyond some of that segregation. And she recorded this, and she said, this definitely needs to be played for FDR. So,
I'm gonna sing Mr. Roosevelt now. I sing Mr. Roosevelt.
oops, sorry.
The good that he has done. He gave a many poor men, and he saved so many lives. Mr. Roosevelt.
All right. I know that I need to get going because I've already gone a little bit over time. The last thing that I wanted to just talk about was in terms of this idea of propaganda, which comes up. They called it respectable propaganda. So to use music in this way to move people towards, and this is something Adrian Dornbush said about, that it will be that moving people toward group action. And so Sidney was really interested in seeing that in action among labor union protest singers who she knew were, were basically putting music to use in that way. And so this is a song. She took a special trip to St. Louis, which had absolutely nothing to do with the Resettlement Administration's rural, communities. And she only sent in information in a confidential letter that was sent to the home of someone. And so this was very much tried to be kept quiet. And I don't want to cut into too much more of Kathy's time, but maybe I can just play.
Rock-a-bye baby. Rock-a-bye baby.
Oh, shoot. Sorry.
Cheryl, you're fine with time. You're okay.
Oh, okay. Okay, great. Let's see.
Rock-a-bye baby. Rock-a-bye baby on the treetop. When you grow up, you work in the shop. When you get married, your wife will work too, so that the rich will have nothing to do. Rock-a-bye baby on the treetop. When you grow old, your wages will stop. When you have spent the little you save, first to the poorhouse, then to the grave.
So those are a couple of my very favorites. But again, it's very hard to summarize in 15 minutes. And I think that, you know, what I've been thinking about these recordings in terms of the Living New Deal's work is that they're sort of like this soundtrack to the FSA photographs, for example. And you know, that people, that they've really sort of been lost at this point. So I know that I didn't have a chance to talk at all about Margaret Valiant, who made her own recording several years later, but she wrote something that I feel like kind of sums up what the RA's music collecting was trying to do. So she says, finally, here are the voices of individuals and groups from all parts of our land who use such tunes as they know or can invent, with such words as they command, with such courage as they can summon, to express their suffering, their protest, and their simple love of life. So anyway, thank you so much for listening. I'm going to pass it over to Kathy. Yeah.
Kathy, you need to unmute.
Oh, I did, didn't I?
Okay.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So, Sidney Robertson and the WPA California Folk Music Project. Sidney Robertson was a young woman in her mid-30s when she single-handedly planned and carried out a remarkable survey of traditional music, the WPA California Folk Music Project. This ambitious undertaking from 1938 to 1940 captured a unique cross-section of the traditional music that people of many cultural backgrounds, predominantly in Northern California, were actively performing in their communities. This is a picture of Sidney from 1929. It's a little bit before the 30s, but I think it gives an idea of who she was. And these are the dates for that she was collecting during the New Deal. First in the Resettlement Administration that became the Farm Security, and then the WPA. Sidney was born in San Francisco in 1903, and she grew up in a privileged home punctuated by high cultural activities and musical training focused on traditions of Europe. As the Depression worsened during the late 20s, she became disillusioned by her self-indulgent bourgeois life in California and became interested in folk music, especially curious to explore exactly what American folk music was. She became a folk music collector for the Resettlement Administration, as you've heard, until it was dissolved, but she was eager to continue the work afterwards that fascinated her, having been hooked, as she said, on the hopeful and dedicated New Deal. When Sidney returned to her native California in 1937, she was determined to create a large folk music collecting undertaking in the state. By working with the WPA's Northern California office in San Francisco, Sidney conceived the contours of a project that would generate recordings, photographs, technical drawings of instruments, field reports, and accompanying documentation representing both English language and foreign language musical culture that she knew was prevalent throughout the very diverse, culturally rich state. Oops. Here are a few pictures from the project. Here's Sidney copying a recording, the WPA staff underneath, also a shot of the dark room where there's a photographer, and then the draftsman. Sidney's proposal to the WPA was accepted in 1938 with the Library of Congress's Archive of American Folk Song and the University of California, Berkeley serving as co-sponsors. The library supplied Sidney with blank acetate discs for recording and guidance in cataloging, plus additional support, with the agreement that they would acquire the original copies of the recordings that they made. The University of California in Berkeley provided office space, which you see here, on Shattuck Avenue on the campus for the 20 staff Robertson handpicked from the California Relief Rolls as required by the WPA for work relief projects such as Roosevelt envisioned that provided a minimum of salary for its employees. Sidney was eager to find unemployed individuals who would be helpful to her in her research, while she herself was seeking performers and recording them. With this in mind, she engaged photographers, draftsmen, and researchers seeking work, plus a variety of others who could assist her in making connections with cultural groups whose music she was to collect. To name just a few of the staff, there was a Mr. DeVere, who had lost his job as dairy delivery man in Contra Costa County and helped her locate Italian and Portuguese musicians along the route. Also a son of a couple who had performed ragtime and popular tunes on San Francisco's Barbary Coast in the early years of the century, who were eager to be recorded. From October 1938 through early 1940, Sidney recorded 35 hours of music from over 180 performers, 2/3 from European and Middle Eastern cultural backgrounds, and the remaining third from English language performers. Sidney was outgoing and gregarious, working around the clock, and focused on what she said, quote, what people were singing, on an instantaneous disc recording machine, a little bit more modern, a little bit more portable than the Garwick machine that Cheryl spoke about. She collected recordings wherever and whenever she could find them. How does one find songs, she wrote during the project? They are everywhere at hand. A man changing a tire on Shattuck Avenue in Berkeley last month sang an old ballad as he worked and was startled by an urgent request to repeat it so it could be written down. A receipt for a bill paid to a Railway Express delivery man was signed with a Basque name, and this led to a whole nest of songs. Unlike many folk music collectors in the early 20th century, Sidney was open-minded in what she collected, recording contemporary and popular tunes, as well as more traditional ballads and songs. It was the living folk music that she was after, not a salvage effort intent on uncovering long-lost relics. Sidney once wrote, "Folk song is song alive. It seems to me that folk song has gone on living only where new ways and new uses for it could give it freshness and vitality." And as I've mentioned earlier, Sidney was determined to collect both English and also foreign language performances that American folk music collectors were slow to pay much attention to. In her instructions to WPA staff working on the project, she wrote, "California folk music is understood to mean any traditional music, song, or dance tune now current in California. The investigation is not, of course, to be limited to performers whose native language is English. The minority groups in California have much to add that is of general interest." In Sidney's mind, they were all Americans and all migrants from somewhere else, except for the indigenous peoples of California, and she considered it all American music. However, because of the increasing xenophobic anti-foreign sentiment rampant in the country at the time, Sidney consistently described her foreign language recordings as minority in order to avoid using the word foreign. She received pushback in her collecting work by some who preferred that she focus on songs and music from California's Anglo heritage. In an article she penned soon after the project closed in 1940, she wrote, "No discussion of folk music in the Western United States should be undertaken without a reminder that the Anglo-Saxon tradition is very young there. This is particularly true of California, which has been a part of the United States for less than 100 years and still has a large Spanish-speaking population. The first major influx of English-speaking people came with the gold rush. Before that time, they were numerically few and largely transient. I'd like to give you a very small taste of what Sidney recorded in California, beginning with a song sung by Portuguese Azorian Alice Lemos Avila, one of the WPA workers who hosted a Portuguese music hour on KRE radio in Oakland and served as a contact for performers in the Azorian community. This is a playful song about the plight of those who have no lovers, who appear sickly, who do not go out at night, and are not visited at their windows after dark by suitors.
Oh, Laurentina, ó verde limão, quem não tem amores não tem coração. Oh, Laurentina, ramo de salsa crua, quem não tem amores não sai de noite à rua. Oh, Laurentina.
Sorry, I don't have time to play much more. Sicilian Giuseppe Russo sang a number of Neapolitan songs for Sidney. As she wrote in one of her WPA field reports, Mr. Russo has been extremely helpful. He says I can come over any day but Saturday because that's a busy day for a barber. We put up the recording machine in his house and he dashes back and forth when the bell rings, leaving me to wait until he has tended to a customer. I should mention that Sidney's field notes are full of evocative contextual information about what and who she recorded, always conveyed through her distinctive, sometimes flamboyant, expansive and colorful narrative. And it's a lot of fun to read. This is a song that Mr. Russo sings. It's a lively and sort of a risque Neapolitan tarantella about a man who wishes for more than a kiss from his sweetheart as she is playing hard to get. Oops.
Napoli bella stinga sto cuore rugna te, tu dammi un basile, ti voglio bene ne. Napoli bella stinga sto cuore rugna te, tu dammi un basile, ti voglio bene ne. Io non voglio basillo, son cerillo, piano pianillo da voglio azzicca. Tu mi baciaste e poi t'arraggiaste e poi mi dicevano annivene ca.
Ward Ford. Robertson had recorded the multi-generational Ford Walker family in logging communities in northern Wisconsin while she was working for the Resettlement Administration. She was pleased to locate the Ford brothers again, all three of them, once they had traveled west seeking work on the Shasta Dam. Sidney traveled widely in her car on her own, often with a dog that had been lent to her and her recording machine. She seemed comfortable sleeping in her car or camping on the side of the road in the Sierras and further north, especially when she was too far to make it back home to the Bay Area for the night. Here, Ward Ford sings Barney McShane, a popular song enjoyed by the Irish immigrant community at the time. Ward Ford sang a lot for the other CCC workers on the job, and he was a favorite.
This song, Barney McShane, learned from my brother Bogue, who learned it from Walt Culver of Boulder City, Nevada. When the clouds begin to gather and the thunder it did roll, down the lane came Barney McShane, and just as he was passing by the widow Aaron's door, ah, what a shame it started to pour. And he looked in there so longingly at that comely widow's gate, when she hollered, Barney, darling, won't you wait? You ought to come in out of the rain Barney McShane, and sit down until the sun comes out again. It's a cup of tea I'll brew, just enough for me and you, and we'll cuddle up together and we'll talk about the weather, Barney dear.
Let's see. Sidney's collecting work fit well with the New Deal's focus on documenting and validating the lives of everyday Americans. She made recordings in a wide range of contexts: at an outdoor Mexican wedding celebration in Carmel, a Hungarian Christmas party in Oakland, an impromptu gathering of singing and performing gold miners, some of whom were sons of the 49ers, meeting in the Arizona bar in Groveland in the Sierras, and while visiting Russian Molokhan church services on San Francisco's Potrero Hill. Included in the foreign language songs are national and patriotic songs from the old country, nostalgic songs of lives and experiences left behind, and songs commenting on the strange ways of life in the New World. From English language performers, she collected sea shanties, fiddle tunes, gold rush songs, and minstrel show routines remembered from former years. Also, migrant songs and ballads brought cross-country to California during the Depression. Almost all of the music that Sidney documented in California had received no attention before she recorded it. Notable in Sidney's methodology was a deep ethical and democratic approach to her interactions with performers. She was painfully protective of their rights and intent on a kind of collaboration that was unusual among folk music collectors of the time. Towards the end of the WPA project, Sidney applied for a second round of WPA funding, hoping to focus on the rich musical heritage of Asian groups in California, the Chinese, Indians, Japanese, and others. But by 1940, WPA funds were increasingly diminished. New Deal arts projects were increasing disfavor among politicians and many in the general public, and were on their way out as the country pivoted in other directions. New Deal initiatives such as the WPA California Folk Music Project and the activities of the Resettlement Administration's music unit served to validate the musical traditions of exemplary, yet so often unsung Americans in radical ways. They also preserved the creative artistry of those they recorded for future generations, something Sidney had in mind when she engaged the Library of Congress in her project. Sidney's achievements illustrate some of the best of New Deal values: an emphasis on community and the acknowledgement, documentation, and support of Americans from all cultural backgrounds, immigrants and all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, both of you. That was so interesting. I want to invite anyone who's participating as a viewer in today's webinar to put your questions into the Q&A. And we have a couple to start with, but we hopefully will get to all of your questions. So I'm just curious about how the two of you became interested in this topic of music. Do you come from musical families, or how did you come so immersed in this subject? Cheryl, go ahead.
Sure, I can go first. I think that I have realized, I mean, I have been a singer who's interested in group singing since I was a little kid. And I studied vocal music, but kind of gave it up when I realized that I was just being sort of trained to be an opera singer. And I think that, you know, and so I've kept singing in groups, and that's what brought me to go to grad school in ethnomusicology. And I think that really trying to understand how, you know, communal singing, how singing together, how group singing and, you know, music in general can create community that's the thread that runs through my first book, which came out of my dissertation about the song God Bless America. So anyway, it was my mom led singing when I was younger, and so yeah, it goes deep for me.
Kathy?
Well, I grew up in a family where we all played chamber music. I play violin as an amateur, but I also have done some fiddling. And when I got the job working at the American Folklife Center after getting my PhD in folklore, I was asked to bring together the materials of this collection because a lot of the WPA materials, once the early 40s came about, they were boxed up and sent to institutions and so on. And so I had a chance to sort of read Sidney's correspondence and listen to her recordings, and I was just absolutely fascinated by her and her curiosity and her brilliance and also the fact that I had never heard of her. And I think still, I'm hoping that with these two books that are coming out, Cheryl's and mine, people will acknowledge the role that she played in many different aspects of her methodology and what she collected. Her whole mindset was actually quite modern in a sense, and she was not interested necessarily in an antiquated pursuit, but she wanted to know about living folk music, which I think is closer to the way we think of things now than maybe a lot of people in the 30s.
Yeah, there's a lot of interest in the questions about how can people go and listen to these things? Are they online?
Well, the California Gold online collection, all of the recordings are online. They were digitized. The photographs are there too. And so, yes, you can find them on the Library of Congress's website. And I should say, the Library of Congress has many materials and has the original recordings and so on, but also the University of California, Berkeley Music Library has many materials that were collected, documentary research background on California songsters and whatever that the WPA staff. So the Music Library at UC Berkeley also has sort of a sister collection and has the scale drawings, the original technical scale drawings that are blueprints and so on, that are gorgeous. So.
And in terms of the Resettlement Administration, they have been, most of them have been digitized, but they haven't had the attention that Kathy gave to the California folk music project. So they haven't yet been sort of curated, and I am going to be putting a selection of them up on my website when the book comes out. Basically, if you go into the American Folklife Center and ask, they will definitely let you listen to them in there. But yeah, that's why they're not very well known.
There's been a lot of interest in Charles Seeger and his relationship to Sidney. Can one of you speak about that?
In terms, well, I mean, that's an interesting question. They were friends, Charles Seeger, but that's another thread that I cover in my book in terms of the women who did the work. She once said that he never really understood the difference between thinking up the idea of doing the work and doing the actual work. And so they had, and again, this is they came from similar backgrounds in terms of classical music. They had a friend, Henry Cowell, in common when they met. So I think, yeah, I think that it was.
So I also had a question, and some other folks have been raising the questions about photographs, and this is for you, Cheryl, but what role did the photography have in this project? And one person asked, whether Sidney knew Dorothea Lange, who was with the FSA and who was also a really renowned photographer.
I don't know exactly who, their work wasn't seen as connected at the time, because the photographers were, the way I think of them is the photographers were outward facing as a PR to gain public support for what the RA was doing, and the special skills was inward facing in terms of their work on the homesteads. So I think that would, it would need to be investigated specifically. I do know, in terms of Dorothea Lange in particular, that Margaret Valiant, who did her recording in the same FSA migrant camps, was there around the same time as Dorothea Lange, but I don't have anything that links them together. And again, I'm sorry that I just didn't have a chance to bring up Margaret's work, because that's kind of a whole other.
Well, why don't
Whole
you
other
tell us a little bit about her, about Margaret Valiant? I know you wanted to do so, and I think we have a little time.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I mean, Margaret Valiant she was the only woman, the first woman who was hired and the only one who was a representative who was sent out to the homesteads and sort of seen as the only one who actually fulfilled their goals in terms of using music in a successful way. She worked at Cherry Lake Farms in Florida. And then she also was sort of the last woman standing when what ended up happening was Rex the Red left, he resigned, the RA became the FSA, and things like the music unit got shut down. And that's when Sidney went back to California. Margaret actually stayed and was like a one-woman music unit. And that's when she did her recording. And it was focused on in California and Arizona. And so some people might know about Alan Lomax actually supported the what are they called? The Todd Sonkin recordings, which are often put forward as the first, but Margaret's were actually the first, and it's just people didn't know about them.
Okay.
So.
So you mentioned some of the headwinds that the Resettlement Administration faced. Could you talk a little bit about that? Maybe, Kathy, would that be one that you'd like to answer?
Not about no, I think Cheryl should answer about the Resettlement Administration.
So, yeah, I just wanted to ask it a different way. So the Resettlement Administration faced headwinds that were ultimately, it's sort of fatal blow, right? But also, like, the people who had the music unit in mind as a way to build solidarity on the homesteads, were they able to actually do that? Was there a lot of discontent, or did people actually come together around some of these programs?
I mean, I would say it's a community by community question. Like I said, Cherry Lake was seen, they all valued what Margaret did. There was certainly pushback from, these Northerners from Washington coming down and, imposing their will. So it's a complicated question. And different homesteads, went in different directions after the New Deal. Many of them still exist, if that's kind of part of your question. Some of them have museums, some of them have just been sort of integrated into the neighborhoods, and they're just these nice old houses. So that, I mean, it's a question that I kind of grapple with because in general, the story behind resettlement is that here's this funny, quirky failure. But when you talk about in terms of what they did for individuals and government's sort of belief in the power of music, in a different way. And I think it continued with, their arts programs through the WPA, which was basically what they pivoted to. It's like, let's focus on jobs. Let's,
Do you know, well, maybe I'll ask this of Kathy. Do you know whether Zora Neale Hurston, who also did some music collection for the WPA, I think, could you talk about her role as a music collector in Florida?
Well, I guess I've looked for connections between Sidney and Zora Neale Hurston because there were some similarities, but I have never found them, never found correspondence between them. And but she was certainly, she was working in a totally different way, but similar in many ways. I guess I don't want to go totally into talking about Zora Neale Hurston at this point, but she was a key figure, of course, and came from a very unique perspective in her work in Florida, especially.
Was there a specific interest in recording African-American folk music?
Well, in California, Sidney decided not to. She knew she couldn't spread her net out too far, and so she said she was not going to necessarily seek out African-American music nor indigenous music, just because she didn't have the background for it, and she only had, it was 17 months that she was working on this project. The Puerto Rican women who sang for her in Oakland were of Afro Puerto Rican background. She wrote about that, but otherwise she didn't focus on African American materials in California. I think she was just racing to collect as much as she could and decided she'd put a few limits on what she was doing.
Was that also true of the music unit, Sidney? Yes. Cheryl.
Well, I think the RA and the music unit in their work in the South were completely ordered by Jim Crow. So that's something that most of the homesteads in general in the South were whites only. There were some for Black families, so that there was just this hard color line that was really difficult. I think that she trained with John Lomax. She actually got sent out. That's where she learned how to record, as she went on a trip with him and Frank Brown, another collector, and was really disgusted by the way that he treated. He was he was very he was just very racist in terms of the way that he treated. He would go to Black to interview prisoners, and she said, I don't want to do that, and I don't want to put any Black men in jeopardy by trying to go over that color line in terms of as a white woman. That's what she said. It's a very fraught issue, and in the New Deal in general, in terms of how it upheld some of this, the segregation and the racism. So that's what I would say.
Well, I'm just going to ask, this is the last question that we have time for, but Kathy, could you tell us about what happened to Sidney after the WPA California project dissolved?
Well, she really, although she came from a wealthy family, the family lost everything during the stock market crash. And so she had an undergraduate degree from Stanford. She was brilliant, but she didn't have an affiliation, and she really needed support. which was, and then Henry Cowell came forward and asked her to marry him. He was modern American composer, and he was from a similar progressive background in California and knew a lot of the same people, so it was a convenient marriage to have. I have other thoughts about that myself, but she didn't collect as much after she got married, which is really quite sad. Though in 1950, she did go on a field collecting trip to Appalachia with Maud Carpelese, who had gone with Cecil Sharp in the teens to record music, and she and Maud Carpelese sought sort of songs songs as well as performers that had been recorded in the teens. She also did a big recording project in Ireland that generated a folkways recording, the songs of Erin. She did a little recording here and there, but she never really did the kind of collecting she did when she was out on the open road by herself. And for me, there's a little bit of a sadness to that, because she had so much potential, and there's respectability politics. She was a very forthright woman, and it just didn't fit into her life. And I have wondered about that a lot.
Okay, well, I want to thank you both so much for bringing us this information. It's just such a fascinating topic. For those of us who joined us, we put the information about how you can purchase Cheryl's and Kathy's book in the chat. And I just want to give you a quick reminder of our upcoming webinars on Tuesday, April 16th at 5 p.m. with Doug Lean of the Ranger Doug Enterprises. And he'll talk about his lifelong quest to find and preserve the iconic WPA National Park posters. And I want to thank both Kathy and Cheryl so much for being with us today. And thanks to all of you for joining in the conversation, and for all your support for being part of tonight's webinar. And we hope to see you again very soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having
Thank
us.
you.
It was a lot of
Thank
fun.
you.
It was wonderful. Thank you so much.